Malinowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a lot of commentary in this hearing about why we're in this situation, and I would start by saying what ought to be obvious, and that is that our inflation and supply chain problems are probably not the result of a bill that hasn't passed yet. They are probably not the result of an infrastructure bill that was just signed a couple of days ago. What we know is that we had a global pandemic, which resulted in massive economic downturns in the United States and all around the world. But then we did something that we've never done before. We actually helped the American people not just endure and survive this downturn, but to emerge from it with more household wealth than they did before they started. That's a success. That's something that we should all be proud of, and much of it was bipartisan. The legislation that helped our small businesses and families and workers stay afloat through the first year of the pandemic was supported by just about every single member of this committee. But so here's the situation. We have huge disruptions in production all around the world, workers not coming to work, workers sick, disruptions in transportation and bringing goods to market. But at the same time, the American people have more money to spend. And interestingly, they are spending it in different ways. So for example, last year, we saw a 32% increase in e-commerce because people were staying home rather than going to stores. They're ordering stuff online. And so with all of those facts, I think it's fairly easy to understand how we got to where we are. And I wanted to ask the witnesses maybe to comment a little bit on that, and maybe starting with Mr. Cordero. In your testimony, you brought out another remarkable fact, and that is that the ports of LA and Long Beach in the first 10 months of this year actually moved 17% more containers than they did in a similar period in 2018. And yet we have ships parked offshore, but we are actually moving more containers through the system. Could you say a little bit about why that is, what we know and what we don't know?
So thank you, Congressman. So yes, the ports will have a record year for 2021 in container movement. And in part, there's again, a myriad of factors as to why that is in terms of what we have before us. But one of the things that you mentioned that's very key is how we've been able to continue the trajectory on the economy in terms of the benefit of what we're seeing. And one of them is consumer spending. I think that's at a very high mark. E-commerce is a major factor in terms of our spending habits. We could buy online 24/7. So I think the good news is the consumer demand that's driving this and the business environment that, again, whether it's production, raw materials, and durable goods and so forth. So I think, again, the good news is it's a very good economy that we're seeing because of the policies that we've been putting in place here in the last couple of years. But the thing I really want to stress and say to this committee again, just remember that in 2010, a major economist here in this industry forecasted that if we did not invest and do something in terms of how we operate in the North American ports here in America, that in 2020, we would have some serious congestion issues. He was right on the money. And that's what I want to stress to this committee, that crisis set aside, we need to continue the prioritization of how important ports are to this.
Thank you. And we have just, thanks to President Biden and a bipartisan majority in the House and Senate, thanks to those courageous Republicans who joined us, we just approved a major investment in our ports that will help in the long term. I don't have that much time left. I did want to ask Ms. Reinke about the question of visibility in the supply chain. Somebody mentioned to me a few days ago that we actually have very little idea of where all these containers are. There are 20 million or so shipping containers around the world, but unlike aircraft and their passengers, there's no sensors on these containers. Is that correct? Would would the system benefit from a greater investment in the technology that allows us to have perfect visibility of where everything is in the system? And should the United States be setting those standards?